This is Matthew, host of the Superhero Ethics Podcast, and I've got an ethical question for you. If I'm trying to help you not listen to ads, is it ethical for me to do an ad to help you do that? If you go to our website, theethicalpanda.com, and just click on the join button, for $5 a month, $55 a year, you get to hear all of our episodes without ads. Was I ethical in doing this? Let me know. Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Today we are going way back. We're going back to one of the first fandoms that I ever became a part of, and we're doing it with one of the first co-hosts I ever had. Paul Hoppe, our original co-host, is here to talk to me about sports fandom. We're going to be looking at it through the lens of the movie Fever Pitch, which came out, I think, about 20, 30 years ago. It's a British movie, Colin Firth.
28, yeah.
28, thank you. There is a American version with Jimmy Fallon, which we'll probably reference a little bit. But we're not even talking about that movie. We're talking about fandom in general of sports and what goes into being a fan, and especially what goes into riding through the highs and the lows of sports and why we hang on to it and whether that's a good thing or not. With all that, I am wearing a Mets shirt. For those of you who can see, that was kind of my first fandom. Well, my first sports fandom, at least. I have always been a Star Wars person, first and foremost, but I became a Mets fan when I was maybe like 6 or 7 years old. The Jets and the Knicks got added in later, but baseball has always been my first love. Paul, what about you? What role has sports fandom played in your life as a young kid, but now kind of more recent?
Yeah, I'd say I was always more of an Ets fan.
That's
I
fair.
didn't actually watch basketball, but I was like, clearly I have to root for the Nets and the Jets.
Okay,
I'm
I
a
like
Mets
it.
fan,
I like it.
You know,
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we're gonna go through the obituaries today, but
Robert Redford did pass away, who starred in one of the best baseball movies of all time, The Natural.
And I had mentioned to you that I thought my kind of introduction to baseball was when the Royals won the World Series in 1985, because my mom's from Kansas City, and
Right.
she was a huge baseball fan as a kid. She was a Yankees fan, mostly because I guess the Kansas City teams were always the farm teams for the Yankees.
In the 70s and 80s, yeah, that's pretty accurate.
In the
In the 50s and 60s, yeah.
40s and 60s, pretty much even through the aughts, right? I mean, Johnny
Yeah.
Damon played. Well, anyway. But then I was thinking about it. I was like, oh, The Natural came out in 1984. And I probably saw it like in the theater, the year after Return of the Jedi.
Right.
Speaking of, various fandoms. And that might actually be the movie that got me interested in baseball. And then the fact that my mom was a Royals fan and they won the World Series. And then I was like, oh, I'll be a Mets fan. There's a 100-foot mural of Dwight Gooden outside my bedroom window. And yeah, of course, they'll win the World Series the first year I'm a fan,
Yeah.
So I like to take credit for that.
There you
But
go.
unfortunately, we can only have one first year as a fan. So I have no more magic to bestow. And as a result, they haven't won one since then.
Magic has not been bestowed or bestowed. It's been all downhill since then.
Exactly. Although, last year was what I would call a very magical year for the Mets. And just in terms of like the role in my life as a kid, it was a huge deal from about the time when I was 8 until maybe 12. Somewhere 11, 12, I started getting into, like role-playing games and soccer, actually.
Yep.
Interestingly, related to like Fever Pitch, and then various other things, music as well. And so I kind of drifted away from baseball due to a variety of factors, but then came back to it in sort of like young adulthood, partially thanks to steroids, I think, like for real, like the whole 1998 home run chase. Like it was like, there were big headlines that were like, oh, wow, these are records that have stood for decades. And, and then it didn't hurt that like the Mets were good. And it didn't hurt that I had friends like you who were into it. And, we went to some games. We watched some epic games while waiting to go play poker.
Yep.
And we're like, how is this game still going?
We watched some games while playing poker.
That too.
At
that
places
too.
that aren't around anymore, but we're mentioned the movie rounders.
Yeah. And, anybody who goes and plays poker live in a casino or in a card room, probably it's hard to not like witness sports to some extent, right?
Yeah.
Like it's always there
Right.
on the TV and such. So
And that's true at casinos. It's true at bars. It's true now at a lot of barbershops. I mean, it's always been true.
Yeah.
Any place where men are thought to gather,
right?
You will often find that.
Yeah, exactly. And to be honest, like, it became a bit more of a kind of like intellectual pursuit, like stats and sabermetrics and stuff, and thinking about like player value and like roster construction and stuff like that. But once I went back to playing a lot of live poker, I really did find it like useful, like basically just being able to speak baseball and to some extent other sports, but not so much, but mostly just like being able to have conversations with people I never met before, might not have a lot in common with in terms of other interests. And, there's a game on, you can just talk about it and talk about what's going on in the league and whatever. And, I had a neighbor who just moved, but who I can't say I had a lot in common with. And, definitely political differences. And every time you kind of, steer the conversation, like mention something like that, I'd be like, how about those Phillies,
Yeah.
And they'd be like, oh, the Phillies. I was probably still mad at the Phillies, even though they just clinched the NL East, but, and I'm like, okay, so that makes sense. And this is what I've heard about Phillies fans, but just like something to talk to someone about when maybe that's like maybe a little more interesting than the weather. But in contexts where personally, like I would maybe feel kind of awkward or not feel like I had a lot to say. It's like, well, here's something concrete that we can talk about and have opinions about and like maybe get a little excited about, a little worked up about, or not. And then, and then sometimes you get into other conversations, but it's a way to kind of become friendly with someone, whether or not it's actually friends with them.
It's a social lubricant in that regard.
Right, exactly. Yeah, without getting drunk, basically.
Right. Although often those two go hand in hand.
Often they go together, yes.
Unfortunate.
But they certainly don't have to.
Exactly. For me, my father was a fan of certain teams, and baseball was a big part of his life growing up. He was a big Brooklyn Dodgers fan. I've talked about how Jackie Robinson was kind of like the head of civil rights stuff for him, and he taught me about the importance of that. But he's a fan of certain teams. I think in many ways my mother was more a fan of sports as a whole. And she loves sports, and she taught me a very similar thing about that. She taught me kind of one of the best ways to have conversations with people is to be able to know about the game. She'd always say, just know what happened in the game last night. And I think part of this, was something that she had learned. She was one of the first women at an Ivy League law school. She was one of the first women at her law firm. She had kind of been part of that wave. It was like, okay, I got to be like the boys to fit in. And so, and I think we can get into a lot of gender stuff about whether there should be other things. Most recently this year, I saw a lot of, in the same way there's a lot of videos out there of like women being like, hey girls, let's all know about football so that we can have those conversations. I saw a lot of videos from guys being like, guys, here's what you need to know what happened on Love Island last night, because that's what the women at your office are going to be talking about. And I love both, so I was happy for both. But yeah, I always had that idea of sports as with certain exceptions, which we'll talk about, but sports as a way to open doors, to start a conversation with a stranger when I needed to pass the time, if you're just kind of bored in line or stuff like that, or, you're kind of hanging out in an uncomfortable situation. And even as you said, with people where it's not opening a new conversation, it's finding a safe topic. You talked about your neighbor. I've certainly had that, but also I've talked about how my father and I had a really volatile relationship for many years. There were a number of years around high school and college where the only thing we could safely talk about was sports.
Right.
And not only just that we could talk about it, but it was a love that we shared. And I still have a distinct memory of when one of the years when the Knicks were in the playoffs in the early 90s, and he and I the game was on, he and I were just having a knockdown, drag-out fight, screaming at each other, and there was some kind of epic, like late game comeback that the Knicks started to do. And we started kind of more and more pausing to watch a play. And eventually we just stopped fighting and watched the rest of the game and like hugged when the Knicks won in overtime.
Yeah.
And, it didn't change anything. We had a terrible fight again the next night because it was a bad relationship.
But it was like a reprieve, right?
Yeah, it very much was. And I've always... So Fever Pitch is a movie about... Colin Firth playing very against type. It's a fun movie. We're not really going to do a review of it today, but it's one of my favorite movies about the importance of fandom of sports to someone. And one thing it really talks about is how much being a fan in the main characters in that story's life, it's something he's been since he was a little kid, and it's one of the only things that he's held on to for that much of his life. And yeah, so I'm glad we're kind of talking about it in these terms, because I think it kind of really sets the table of this has been something that's kind of like been a through line, at least for my life, and it sounds like for your life, since the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, I would hesitate to use the word through line because, and I did kind of resonate with that line in the movie, where at one point he says maybe everyone should want something they've always wanted.
Yeah.
And just the idea of having this sort of consistency of something that's kind of always there. There's always the next season, the next season. Except in 2020 when there was definitely no baseball season. It didn't happen. It doesn't count. And like 94 when actually anyway,
the season was canceled because of the strike, and
right. And my grandfather, my mom's dad, who actually had been a, I don't know, semi-pro or like minor league baseball player or whatever as a young man. He actually died that year, like right around when the World Series would have been, which was like really weird, because he was actually born in 1903, the year of the first World Series.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So he was born the year of the first World Series and then died the year of the second World Series that didn't happen, because in 1904, the Giants were like, was it the Giants or the Pirates?
I mean,
the National League team was like, we're not going to play the AL team. They're not good enough.
I've joked before that my mom died so she wouldn't have to see Trump win.
Yeah.
And, it's similar kind of idea there. I get it.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's so I've definitely come and gone repeatedly, I think, and sometimes just as a matter of sort of life changing and getting other interests, which has been a theme with other interests as well, like martial arts. I went in and out of, music, poker.
Yeah.
But and then sometimes more deliberately or in a deliberate attempt that may have failed. In like 2011, I was like, I'm not a Mets fan anymore. That's it.
Yeah.
Not because they weren't doing well, but because I really didn't like their front office. I hated the direction the team was going in. And I was like on strike. And I haven't actually spent a penny on Major League Baseball since then. Yeah. And I went a number of years not really rooting for the Mets, but like following them and trying to pick another team. Like I was like, oh, maybe I'll root for the Cubs, because they haven't won in forever. That would have worked out pretty well, but I just couldn't, The Blue Jays are like my AL team, but it's just, it's hard to like, when you have this history with one team, I think it's really hard to like then go and be like, no, this is my new team. I mean, I know people from LA who are Dodgers fans and moved to New York and became Yankees fans. And I'm like, what? Like
I've been trying to root for the Minnesota team since I moved here, and I do like going to their games. And I mean, Minnesota's great; I love it, but it's just never going to be in my blood the way the Mets are. And it's interesting. I think I think the discussion there over through lines makes a lot of sense, because I have never been. I have definitely kind of waxed and waned in terms of how strong a part in my life my fandom played.
Yeah,
but I think I've been probably more consistently there than you have.
Yes.
But also when you dive deep, you dive really deep. So like a lot of times, like we'll have, like when Paul would be getting back into the sport, I'll be like telling him a lot more about the history and stuff. And then as we keep going, I'm like, okay, now Paul's going to take over. And, I have statistical questions. You're the one who's going to tell me all the details. And the Mets have had a really rotating door on their roster. And often I'm like, all right, I don't know who this new pitcher is. Paul, tell me about him,
I'm like, actually you saw him pitch, even though,
Yeah.
But like, I mean, they've had 45 pitchers this year. It's ridiculous. It ties a major league record. Plus at least 2 pitchers who have been on the roster and didn't pitch.
Right.
But yeah. When I get into it, that's how I am with everything though, which is probably why it's harder for me to consistently stick with everything. Because there's just not enough hours in the day.
Right.
Well,
and that's kind of one thing I found interesting about this movie is because, it isn't, I think you could classify it as a rom-com in some ways. I think it's really interesting. Like sort of, it is a story about 2 people who fall in love and figure out if they're going to be together or not.
Yeah.
But it also is just a story of this man's, like in many ways, it's about his love of football, world football, what we would call soccer here, and him learning to balance that with the rest of his life, and whether that's a good thing or not. And I think, so to me, partly I was saying that because I think like he is a much more obsessed fan than I've ever been in ways that I think you can connect with in some ways. Although for him, it's also, particularly because when the movie was made, but also just soccer is not as statistically based a game as baseball is.
Right.
And there isn't really a sabermetric culture in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a lot more for him. Like for him, there's a lot more about like the camaraderie of going to the game and knowing the chants and the songs, which is also just a much bigger part of European and English sports, especially, that I kind of wish we had here, although we do in a lot of college sports. And I want to get into all that, but I want to just talk about one other period of my life as a fan that I think intersected with your life as a fan, which is the fact that Paul and I have been friends since high school. We became friends, I believe, when I was a sophomore and you were a freshman. No, I'm sorry. No,
I was
the
a sophomore,
other end,
you were
yeah.
a junior. Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. So early mid-90s, probably like 93, 94.
94, October 1994.
Yes, okay, so that would actually perfectly explain it then, because we figured out quickly, you know, we were kind of both on the outskirts of a kind of like goth punk subculture in our various schools. We didn't go to the same school, but our friend groups overlapped a lot. We were very involved in role-playing games. We were involved in a lot of that kind of stuff. We figured out we were both huge Star Wars fans eventually. I think we probably had been really close friends for a couple of years before we both figured out we were baseball fans and Mets fans, and that was something we could connect with.
Yeah, that's definitely possible. I wonder. Because I don't remember how long I had. I certainly wasn't talking about baseball in 1994.
Right.
You know, I had been drifting through, like, basically once I started high school, I wasn't really following baseball. But then, you know, the way I kind of remember it was like as the strike being this sort of like final, like, okay, that's it. But like it was.
I think myself. Go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I mean, I definitely went on strike as a fan.
Yeah.
And I think that was probably a big part of it, that it was late, fall of 94 when we first met.
Yeah. And that was definitely that was a that was less for me of a like shutting off the faucet and more just like stopping the drip. Cause like it had been, like in 87, I went to tons of games, and then 88, and then 89, a little less in 90, a little less in 91. And by like 92, 93, I was like, yeah, there's baseball. And maybe I'd listen to some games on the radio or something here and there.
Yeah. Just for a quick history lesson for those who are not, I mean, I would assume most of our followers are deeply enmeshed in the history of the New York Mets from the late 80s.
Right.
And by the way, if you're not a sports ball fan, that's a term we'll be discussing and we'll be getting to you,
sure,
I promise.
Yeah.
With the Roy Kent grunt about the term that just you heard. But the Mets were a very good team right about the point that Paul and I became really big fans. They won the World Series in 86. They were contenders in 87. They got to the NLCS in 88, the playoffs. And then they started trading off a lot of our favorite players.
Yeah.
A number of very good players got involved with drugs, and their careers never really took off and got really demonized in the press because there was an attitude when young black men involved with drugs was really seen as, there's a lot of stereotyping and bad media attention paid to the dangers of young black men involved in criminal activities, which, thank God, we don't have that today.
We've solved that.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think it was that. But then I think also, let's talk about, we were part of a community where, for some good and maybe some not so great reasons, sports was not a big thing that our friends talked about a lot. Talk more about what that was like for you in terms of like, you were, especially back then, much less influenced by the opinions of others than I was.
Yeah.
But certainly, like in a lot of our friends groups, I think just asking you like, oh yeah, what'd you think of the Met game last night was just not going to get you anywhere conversationally, whether you cared about the funny looks it might get you. What's kind of your memory of that and how that affected your interest in sports?
Yeah, I would say it's more that I became friends and started spending time with that group of people because I was more into those things and less into sports at that time.
Yeah.
Not fair. That because I became friends with that group of people, I stopped following sports as much.
Yeah.
And I did like play a little soccer in high school, goalie mostly for some like out in like Prospect Park, which our friend Adam got me to go to. And Adam was, I think he was a Mets fan. Like he, and I remember actually going to some games of the playoffs with him in 2000 and then another friend of his that we became friends with later was a big Mets fan, and then I know in college you had some friends that then I became friends with, and
Yep.
but yeah, it never, I never really thought of it that way, and I think it is more just you know what's interesting? Actually, when I did start to get more into baseball again, aside from just like, you know, watching the home run chase on TV a little bit here and there, it really was 1999, and it was later in 1999 when I started going out to play poker in poker clubs. Yeah. And the game was on every night. And I was like, oh, I'll watch the game. You know, it's on while I'm playing poker. And then people were talking about it. And so I'd say I became friends with a bunch of people who weren't talking about baseball and weren't interested in baseball because I wasn't really that interested in it anymore. And I was interested in other things. But to a large extent, the rekindling of my interest had a lot to do with being around people who were interested and were talking about it. And, you know, like I had in my bedroom for years, like a Dwight Gooden beach towel, and then like 2 posters, and then like articles from like when he hit like home runs in a, you know, while as a pitcher in 1987 when he came back from the suspension or rehab or whatever it was. And so, but now I'm thinking like, well, by the time we met, maybe those had been replaced by Metallica posters, you know?
Yeah, I definitely would have commented on them if I saw them in your house.
Yeah, although like you didn't come to my house that often. Mostly everybody was always at your house, but but you had come to my house, and I was like, okay, by then it probably was Metallica posters. But you know, but I would have had probably, you know, the little figures and whatever. Yeah. I forget what those ones are called, but there's like, you know, I had all the probably 87 or 88 Mets in the little figures in their road uniforms and stuff.
The pre bobbleheads when they just had regular heads.
Yeah. Well, there were bobbleheads, but these were not those. I forget what these ones are called, but
I think what you're getting at those is really important because whatever the causality in terms of which comes first. Yeah. For me, what we're kind of getting at is that for a lot of people, I think, and this movie certainly goes into it, and we're both talking about it, sports fandom is very communal. Like it's very much I don't know if I could sit and watch the Met game and then have no one to talk about it. It would kind of be hard to not do that. And I mean, the extent to which I started this podcast because I wanted to watch a whole bunch of Marvel and I wanted to have people to talk about it. And stuff like that. And I think it's funny because my memory of is in the mid-90s, I stopped caring about baseball, but I didn't stop caring about sports. The Knicks were a really good team at that point, and I paid a lot of attention to the Knicks. I think I just that was one of my first experiences of code switching. Because again, that group of friends we had that were going to poetry readings a lot and playing Vampire the Masquerade and stuff, sports was just the height of non-coolness. And it's interesting because a lot of this movie is about kind of the judgments that the woman he starts seeing and some of her friends make about him as a sports fan. And him kind of acknowledging, there's some truth to it. Like the you know, and I think certainly like I would have been the first back then and still today to say like the role sports plays and economics and gender and stuff is not great. There's a lot of problems with it, but that as I'll actually ask you in a more specific way in a second, but like the way that people would talk about sports, I think was often kind of like, okay, this is not a topic I want to bring up right now. And for me, it was going to college where I met some people who were really big Met fans. And paying attention to that. And I think the fact that the Mets did get good again at that point and then coming home.
It always helps.
And with you going to play poker a lot and then those great, you know, great days we had watching the 98, the 99, and the 2000 Mets.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when you bring up, you know, when people use the term sports ball and whatever. And I do actually remember one of our friends, who's been a guest of the pod, Logan. You know, like talking about sports and like an actual distaste for sports and like that is this negative thing and whatever. And that's like almost the only time I can like really remember that conversation or that coming up. And if people were having this conversation, I was just like, you know, letting it kind of just go past. Because I think I've never been that interested in like other people's disdain for various things. Yeah. You know,
and I was way too much. So you know, makes sense.
I mean, it's probably good to be aware of it, but then not, you know, fixate on it. But yeah, it's the sort of thing where I'm like, oh, really? Like people think that, okay, you know,
Well, I think the mid-90s was also when a lot of those conversations were first really starting. And you know, the old stereotype of you know, the jocks are smashing the geeks into lockers and stuff like that. The mid late 90s was when Dungeons and Dragons had really been a thing for a while, but like with vampire and a lot of other things, goth and role playing and geekdom and a lot of these things were first starting to like, really take off as a social thing. And I think so there started to be some really some social cachet to the idea of you could be part of a subgroup and have friends and have a cool community and sports not be a part of it. And in some cases in reality, and in some cases just because it's what you saw on TV all day, those groups were positioned as like, but the against the preps and the jocks and stuff like that.
Right.
And with the knowledge that like, there were people who went to goth poetry readings and then played on their high school cross country team, whatever it is. Like those groups have always been more porous than we like to admit, but certainly that was the way I think a lot of it was positioned. And yeah, Logan to me was one of the strongest voices of that. But I remember like a lot of the poetry that we would hear at the poetry readings and stuff like that would often talk about like, that was right when the Yankees were getting really good again. There was a lot of talk. I think that was when the beginning would talk of cities paying huge amounts of money to sports things. The steroids conversation was a thing and how that was affecting health. And I think, if I remember, that was also the first time that the press was starting to really pay attention to the violence that was happening with some particularly football players, but players of all sports, towards women, towards kids, towards things like that. And so I think there was just a lot of social factors happening that led to people, feeling like some okay, maybe sports doesn't have to be the thing that everyone is supposed to care about anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess I can kind of imagine how sports had been a little bit more kind of ubiquitous, I think, societally, and how that's to some extent faded. It's interesting that revenue has gone up nonetheless in like all of the major sports, despite any of that conversation.
Right.
As it almost feels like it's become more of a luxury good in a way. They have all these luxury boxes, and you look at I'll just briefly mention the first 2 baseball games I went to. The first one, my friend's dad took me, my friend, and some other friends to a Yankee game. These were diehard Yankee fans. I think he grew up in the Bronx. I know he went to the school that was like across the street from Bronx Science, who used to all beat up the Bronx Science kids like after school kind of thing. Huge Yankee fan. We sat in the bleachers. The tickets were $1.
Yeah.
And then I think 10 days later, I went with my mom and my dad to my first Mets game, and they were like, sorry, the only tickets we have available are right behind home plate. And we're like, oh, okay, how much are those? $10.
Yeah.
So we paid $10 for the best seats in the house that, like, I don't even know if there's actually seats there anymore. Actually, there are, but like there weren't for a while. They had like a tunnel, and it was amazing. And we were like, 10 feet from Pete Rose and Mookie Wilson. And, it was, I was like, no, I like this. This is better than sitting out in the bleachers. But still, that was $10, and we would mostly sit in the upper deck, but it was like $5 or something. And they're so expensive now.
Yeah, I remember there was an ad campaign at one point when I was in college talking about how you could go to Shea Stadium, at that point, the place where the Mets played, and not the best seats, but you could get seats for cheaper than a movie ticket.
Right.
And that was the specific thing. And I remember, like, that was also part of when, I think in high school, every now and then I would suggest, like, hey, do you want to go to a Met game? People would look at me like I, suggested we go to a,
go to a movie or go to
No, they would look at me like it suggested I go to like a kitten slaughtering or something.
Oh, I see.
I
thought you meant when you asked me, and then we would actually maybe go.
Oh, yeah,
but
no.
You meant, yes. Would you like to go to kitten slaughtering?
Probably not. No, I hope not.
Yeah.
So, and what was that like in terms of the movie for you? Because I think, again, like a lot of the movie is about her at first really kind of judging him, but then her getting more involved. And part of what I liked about it was I felt like it showed an even-handedness of there is something important about the fact that sports it's not something he just has to grow out. As you said, that the line you mentioned is the exact line that has always stuck with me about the movie, of the idea of, I do still care about something I cared about when I'm 8 years old, and that's important.
Yeah.
But then also, there's some maturing that he needs to go through in terms of adjusting the role that his team, Arsenal football, plays in regard to the rest of his life. But especially in those first parts, kind of how did you react to those parts of the movie of him being called a yob and her friends getting on her for shagging the football guy and all that?
Right. Yeah. I don't remember when I watched it exactly what my reaction was, but I watching it now, it definitely did feel like this sort of like, you know, one click versus another click kind of, and, you know, the kind of like, you know, condescending, like haven't you grown out of that yet kind of thing, when it's just, it's something that the person cares about a lot. But at the same time, like he was kind of childish and naive about other things, right? About like disclosing their relationship and about, you know, what life is going to be like if, you know, if they stay together and not, but at the same time, like he had very real skills in terms of teaching and being able to relate to the parents of the kids. And I think that's kind of where I feel like the movie really shined, is that it's not like he was this like, it's not either like he was this immature kid who just needs to grow up, or like his way was the right way and she was wrong, and like kind of the wet blanket girlfriend, and then just kind of like came around. Like I feel like she came around to understanding, like the main character of the film is his fandom of Arsenal, right? That's like the main, that's the main
relationship.
That's the main relationship. Yes. I mean, at the end, I guess spoilers. Can we have spoilers?
Yeah.
Is it full spoilers? Where she's pregnant and they're, you know, going to be together and whatever. And he's like, it was a great year for the three of us, you know, me, her, and Arsenal. Like he doesn't mention the baby, right? Yeah. He's like, and Arsenal. and it really is. It's like, it's his relationship with the team. But but I think what she understands by the end of it is it's not his relationship with the team. It's his relationship with the idea of the team and the community and the fan base of the team, really, right? The scene where he almost misses the championship winning goal is, it's not him and her. You know, she tries to get there, whatever, because she kind of gets him now. She realizes that when he said she was like their manager, like or coach, I think they call him manager, right? That like that was actually a compliment. You know, it sounded like a backhanded compliment, but that her students actually said she was like this guy, and that was actually a good thing. And I think she came to understand that like it was his relationship with being a fan, not just like, because I think there's this idea that rooting for a sports team is all about like living vicariously through athletes, right? And like that can be an aspect of it, but to me the more positive aspect is the relationship with the community. You know, and so in that climactic scene where she tries to go to like be there with him, and then it doesn't work out because he thinks she's like a telemarketer or whatever. You know, door to door, like, so go away. You know, it's the worst 1 minute of my life. And then he comes back in. It's him and Mark Strong, you know, his buddy, who's like a diehard, who's like, it's not over. It's not over. And he's like, it might as well be 8-0. It's like, well, it's easier to win 2-0 when it's 0-0 than when you're down 8-0. Right. And so I really appreciated that, like they had him there, like with his boy, you know, with the other fan. But also that like earlier they showed, you know, then they showed the kid there with his mom. Like, it's not like it has to be like a men only thing, right? It's like, it can be a family, it can be friends.
And I think that's one of the things I liked most about the movie is that there's a couple directions where I thought it was going and then it doesn't. Because one of the things that we learn, some of the movie is told through flashbacks of like that after his parents divorced, he didn't really have a way to connect with his father until his father started taking him to games. And that was an important thing. And as we later learned, he becomes much more of a fan than his father, and that's a whole other thing.
And he shares that with his mother.
Right, exactly. His mother
and his sister.
Yeah, and they become big fans. And then and he's a high school teacher. He teaches American literature, which is, I will say, as someone who's constantly listened to, you know, I think there's an awful lot wrong with America, but I do think we have some nice pieces of our culture. And seeing so many Europeans say that the American culture is bullshit, seeing Colin Firth teach American literature made my heart go happy. He's talking about Steinbeck and stuff.
I feel like it said modern American literature, and I was like, is there any other kind?
No, not really. Not really. I mean, Nathaniel Hawthorne and stuff like that.
Sure. There's older. I mean, I exaggerate, but not by a matter of centuries.
He's talking about Steinbeck, which is the 40s, you know?
Yes.
But he's also the coach of his own school's team, and he's clearly quite good at that, and he's good at motivating them, and
helping them when they struggle to feel okay about it,
right,
like,
and to be okay when they don't do the best, and with losing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
In many ways, the advice he gives them about losing. The thing is that he can't take it himself, then his own team is losing.
Yeah,
but to me, the moment that really I cringed a bit because I thought it was going in a direction, but it doesn't, is partway through the movie, they show that he's good. He's like, he's got a good, not inappropriate anyway, but a good parent, teacher-student relationship with the kind of star of the team. And that kid is also going through a divorce, but his dad won't take him to games anymore. He's moved away. His mother doesn't think it's safe for him to go to games alone. And he asks if the coach will go with him.
Right.
And you really see how torn up he is about it. But he holds to the boundary of like, yeah, no, that wouldn't be appropriate. And then we see him coaching the kid's mother when she comes to like a parent-teacher night in how to take him to the game and like what she needs to know. And I had a moment of wondering, have I misjudged the rom-com? Is the whole point, as you said, that this fellow teacher is the wet blanket who doesn't want him to enjoy his things, but actually the real love interest is going to be the mother of this boy. And I was so glad they didn't do that.
No.
Yeah,
no.
Like, I mean, terrible. But you can see, like, I was like, oh, this is a British movie. We're okay, because like that's the thing Hollywood would love to do with this kind of story.
I could see that pothole. I will say I have taken one of my students to baseball games, although I guess my student took me to baseball games. But
Taekwondo, you're also not like officially regulated by the state in the same way.
That is true. That is true.
Yeah. There's some regulation still there, to be sure.
Yeah.
There's a couple other directions I want to take us, but what else about this movie or about this conversation do you want to jump in with?
Let's see. Oh yeah, just the fact that it's Arsenal was actually meaningful to me. Because I don't know to what extent you recall, but my nickname in high school was the Arsenal.
Oh wait, what was this? Say that again.
In high school, I was referred to as the Arsenal.
Oh no! Oh yes, because of the role.
Because I had the trench coat and the black hat, and like I'd be at a poker game and someone I'd be like, oh, don't worry, I have a burrito in my pocket, and I'd take out like a giant burrito, and like I just had everything on me, and so I was referred to as the Arsenal, and so I wasn't like super into soccer, which I'll call it soccer, which by the way is a term that comes from England, for what it's worth. It's like a foreshortening of like association football. Right. But I was into playing, and I liked the idea of it, but like there just weren't a lot of games on TV. And also I feel like it's different sports at different times are like better in how well they're televised. And I think soccer is a difficult game to televise well. I'm sure it's better now than it was before, but in terms of really being able to follow the action while also being able to kind of see the people as people doing athletic things, I think is a challenge. But Arsenal was always like my team, even though I didn't really like follow, but I was just like, that's the team that I root for, even if I don't really know anything about what's going on.
Well, and to me, I thought you were going in a different direction, which is that, so the movie is about Arsenal winning its first championship in like 20 years and how they'd been pretty bad for a long time, but they finally win. Yeah. And the movie is very much about them being underdogs.
Right, yes.
They win, I think it's in 89 that the movie is set. Starting in the mid to late 90s, they kind of became the Yankees or the Dodgers of Europe, of English football.
They started winning a lot, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
After,
And being
and
a team
I think they won the season after this movie came out, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, very much so. Kind of like how the American version's about the Red Sox winning for the first time in however many years.
Yeah, and while they were filming it, they were winning, and then they're like, oh, we have to do rewrites and include this amazing run. Yeah. Which also, by the way, Arsenal wins by beating Liverpool 2-0 in the last match of the season. Liverpool and the Boston Red Sox are both owned by, I think, Fenway Sports Group.
Sounds about right. That sounds about right. All the connections. Yeah, the Yawkey family or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. One of the things that got us onto this conversation, shifting a bit, and I think it's an important thing in the movie, and one thing I want to talk about is sports isn't always about winning.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I have been having some interesting conversations that I thought would be interesting to continue here, because it's what the movie also deals with. Is like, it's great to be fans of a team when they win, but when your team loses, and especially losing can kind of go in two ways. One is your team can just suck and it's terrible and it's horrible, or your team can like get really close. Mm-hmm. And then it's one thing, you can be beaten by a better team, but a lot of times also it feels like you should have won, like we made the mistakes, we did the things, the coach made that one choice that of course I, sitting on my couch, would know so much better.
I knew that was a mistake.
Yeah. I was up in the bleachers behind third base, but I could see that ball was a strike. What's wrong with that ump?
Exactly.
It was, 80 times closer. But, I think one of the things that, and in that scene where he thinks that his team is going to lose, as you said, he kind of shouts her out, and he's kind of like, for the last week of the season, it looks like his team is going to blow it, and he's kind of a jerk to everyone around him.
Yeah, yeah.
And you and I have talked about how, like, sports can be both, like, an important lesson in, like, learning how to deal with failure and loss, but also can just be kind of a kick in the head every day until it no longer is a healthy or fun thing.
Right.
Talk about that. What has sports taught you, or what has sports taught you about losing and failure, or what have you learned about those things that have influenced you as a sports fan, or as a baseball fan, or a Mets follower?
Sure. I would say the biggest lesson I learned was just the first year that I watched baseball, 1986. The Mets were this overwhelming favorite to win everything, every step of the way. And during the regular season, they just dominated. It was never close. There was no pennant race. It was just, they won the season practically in May, and it doesn't end until September, right? Not literally, but just like it was never close. They're rivals from the year before. They just swept in a 4-game series in St. Louis, and they're arch rivals. Mm-hmm. And it was just like, the season was just like about watching them win games. Like 2 out of every 3 games they won. And it was like, oh, okay, that's cool, But then in the postseason, in the playoffs, the NLCS, and in the World Series, they managed to get themselves in a big hole and basically bring it down to the wire and make it look like they were going to lose, despite being a favorite. But so they played like the underdog, right? And in both of those series, they had these amazing come from behind wins that that capped there's a rally, and then they win, and like they're gonna lose and then they win, and both in terms of the like overall scope of the series, where they lose the first 2 to Boston, and then also where they're down to their last strike in game 6, and then they win, and then 2 days later there's game 7, right? Because sometimes it rains, which is why they didn't play the next day. And then they also had to come back in game 7 and win. And then they almost blew it, but then they didn't. And I feel like the lesson that taught me was just like, never give up. It doesn't matter if you're losing, you give it everything you have when you're competing. And if you win, you win. And sometimes you lose, which the next year taught me pretty well. And the year after that, and the year after that, and all the years since. But it really, I feel like every game I've ever played since then, like every game I can remember playing, I don't remember, like in chess, I don't resign, almost ever. There's some cases where you can say, okay, and, but like for the most part, it's just like that taught me just like never give up. Just if you're competing and you're fighting for something, just keep fighting so long as, you have 1 strike left, essentially. And baseball is a game, at least before, without a clock, right? There's no match clock. There's no, you can just keep fouling balls off. And then it's like, okay, now you hit the ball and it goes between the guy's legs and you win the game.
In football, if you're down by 21 points with 15 seconds left to go, like it is just an impossibility because of the ability of the other team to spend time that you're going to win that point. Same with hockey, same with basketball. In baseball,
like tennis.
In baseball, you can have 2 outs in the bottom of the 9th and be 10 runs down, and theoretically you can keep playing because until that 3rd out is recorded, the game never, ever ends. Right,
exactly. And, and other just little things along the way, like the Seattle Mariners in 2001, they blew a 12-0 lead, I think. It was like one of the worst blown leads in history, and they won 116 games that year, which, by the way, is the most games anybody's ever won in a Major League Baseball season.
Yeah.
And then they lost in the playoffs because that happens, right? And so I feel like there's all of these lessons that can be learned, like specifically from baseball. And I think other sports have some of the same lessons and some of their own, right? A game with a clock, manage your time well, right? Like that's not really a baseball lesson. That's a soccer lesson, a football, whatever kind of football lesson. But you know, the idea that one pitch doesn't define you, one at bat doesn't define you, one game doesn't define you, one season doesn't, right? As a performer, as a competitor. So I think, you know, there are a lot of life lessons that you can get if you choose. There's maybe some bad ones you can get too, you know. One thing about baseball that, you know, as a poker player, paying a lot of attention to baseball while playing a lot of poker, there's variance in both games, right? Which basically means you put in your best effort, or you put in whatever effort you can. You exercise your skill to whatever ability you have at the time. And then something happens. And the more skill that you are able to execute, right? The more skillfully you're able to execute the things you can control, the better the distribution of outcomes will be.
Right.
But that's still just a distribution of outcomes. And that distribution of outcomes always includes winning and losing, right?
Right.
It's just the better you are, the less likely you are to lose, the less likely you are to maybe strike out, the less likely you are to, you know, do whatever it is that you don't want to do, and the more likely you are to do the thing you want to do. But there's just chance. There's a ball bounces this way, you know, somebody else was thinking something, and it's not like you were doing some kind of leveling thing where you're trying to trick them or whatever. It's like they decided today I'm going to sit fastball, right? And you throw your fastball and they beat you, and you're like, man, that guy never sits fastball. And it wasn't, they were like, oh, this day I'm going to do it because of this. They're just like, I'm just going to do this, you know? And that's chance too. And there's so much randomness in baseball, in poker, in a lot of sports, but like baseball is really maybe one of the most random sports of like the major sports that people play and watch and pay money to go see. I feel like that's such a good lesson for life because almost everything you do, your effort over a long period of time has a lot to do with what results you're going to get. But over a short period of time, there's a really good chance you're not going to get those results. And over a long period of time, there's still an element of randomness. There always is, right? Like even just like putting a glass of water on a table. It's like, if there's an earthquake, like maybe it doesn't get to the table, you know? There's all sorts of just things that you might take for granted that, you know, and that's an extreme example where it's like, well, that seems like something, if you do it well, you should just be able to do it. Right. But so many other things, there's so much chance in life. And the interesting thing about being a sports fan or viewer is you're invested in the outcome, but it's basically all chance for you, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't actually influence it. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to be like, oh, well, they scored a run while I was turned this way, so I'm definitely not going to turn back that way.
Yeah, you gotta have the rally cap on. You got to eat the donut at the exact right time in the game. You know?
Exactly. So it's, you know, or it's like, oh, well, I didn't watch when they won that game, so I can't watch the next game, or then they'll lose, and it'll be my fault, right? And it's like, well, none of that really makes much sense, but like it makes sense, and you know, because it's like it feels like you have to be able to do something to influence the outcome, right? And when you're at the place, like maybe you can a little bit.
Yeah.
Right.
Because,
like,
and that he says that in the movie at one point.
Yes.
He's like, you know, if I'm not there yelling on my team, what if we needed that one little bit more of support? And
exactly.
We've kind of touched on two different topics that I want us to do later episodes about, possibly on this podcast, possibly if I can dragoon Paul into a just poker and philosophy and life podcast, one of which is on variance and just all the many ways it affects us, all the many ways people don't understand variance and how much that causes problems and everything from like our personal relationships to our international politics, but also in terms of our need for control. Because, and there's so many studies about this, again, this will be a whole podcast into itself, the human brain is programmed, like why we are successful evolutionarily in part. Opposable thumbs help too, but also is because we can see patterns and we love patterns. And the result of that is that we are so good at fighting chaos that we don't know what to do when there isn't a pattern.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, if your brain is going to create patterns when there aren't some. And some people call that incredible genius, and other people call it autism or OCD or, extreme paranoia. And often they're both, like it can be.
And to some extent, there's just being human.
Yeah, being human.
People just find patterns in things no matter what.
Right. Exactly. But sometimes you can find the patterns that aren't there. And I think this is one of the ones that, and this is everything from trying to figure out why the hitter who has hit the home run in this exact situation 3 other times doesn't hit the home run, all the way back to thousands of years ago, trying to figure out why burning the incense in this particular way made the rain fall the last 3 harvests, but it didn't this year and all your crops died.
Yeah.
And like that's just always a thing. And I think sports is like, it's an entree into that and a way to deal with that. I do think it's interesting though, and maybe it's partly because I framed it, but also just our different opinions on that. I tried to frame that as primarily about losing and what losing teaches.
Okay.
And I think that was the thing you kind of didn't talk about really at all. And so I'll ask this, and in part because we were talking about this at a time when, at this point, unfortunately, we had technical difficulties, and that's where the podcast ended. But I hope you enjoyed the conversation. As always, go to theethicalpanda.com for more, and hopefully you'll tune in next week.